Annals of Arithmancy, Chapter 12. The Last Death Eater. Disclaimer. O Fortuna, velet luna, statu J.K Rowling. 31st of December, 2001. Mummy! Auntie Minnie! A sandy-haired 3-year-old in footy pajamas ran through the crowd to find the two women. Hermione acted quickly and scooped the boy up in her arms. "Marcus, what are you doing out of bed?" Hermione asked. Little Marcus clung to Hermione and buried his face in her shoulder. "Auntie Minnie, I had a bad dream," came his muffled voice. "Oh dear, what happened, Marcus?" she asked. "Dad was there," he said softly, and Hermione stiffened. She shot a sharp look over his shoulder and silently pointed at Arthur and Harry to go in and check the house, just in case it wasn't a dream. "He took me away," the boy went on, "and it was cold, and there were snakes." Hermione sighed and patted him on the back. Marcus had that quality of many very small children that he picked up on everything and was too smart for his own good. He really oughtn't to know about his father, or especially any connection with snakes. Now, Marcus, there aren't any snakes here," she assured him. "And you don't need to worry about your father. If he wants to get you, he'll have to go through all of us first. Look, see?" She motioned to the crowd gathered at the party. Harry stepped out of the door of the burrow and flashed a thumbs up. It was clear. It was precisely because of Barty Crouch's attempt to grab Marcus 2 years ago, and Hermione's temporary incapacity now, that they had decided to hold their holidays at the burrow, gathering everyone there. The Vectors, the Lupins, Hermione's parents, Sirius, and the whole Weasley clan. She'd hoped the kids wouldn't pick up on that, but no such luck. Nadia and Sasha had been asking awkward questions too. "Here, Marcus," she said, handing the boy over to Septima. "Go back inside with Mummy, and don't run off." "Come to Mummy, Marcus," Septima agreed, and the now much calmer boy went without a fuss. Hermione sat down and fisted her hands in her short hair. It had grown back quickly at first, so that by Christmas she looked like she'd had a pixie cut rather than a military buzz cut, but it seemed to have slowed down now. Things hadn't improved much in the past weeks either. Britain's allies were still tenuous, and there were new Death Eater attacks in multiple countries. They had to get Crouch. They couldn't let this become another war. "You okay, love?" She looked up to see George offering her a glass of brandy. She took it gratefully. "Thanks, George. He's a good little boy, but I wish he would stay put on a night like tonight." Her husband squeezed her lightly around the shoulders. "Kids are going to make trouble," he said. "Why, even Percy had his moments at that age, or so we heard. Anyway, I think Crouch is smart enough not to make a move at a party like this." "I hope so. I'm worried he's not sane enough to think that way. Attacking that ritual—" "So he learned his lesson then. Relax, we've got loads of skilled fighters around tonight." She smiled. "Of course, George." They circled the party slowly, making small talk with the guests. Hermione always kept an eye on the darkness surrounding the burrow, but all seemed quiet. Fleur was having an animated conversation with Harry and Ginny, trying to sell them on baby names. Ginny was 5 months gone now, and she wore a dress that flaunted it, which was a very Weasley thing to do. "Hermione, here, you should back me up." Fleur roped her into it. "I think Victoria is a very pretty name, no? If the baby is a girl and is born at the start of May, I think you have to use it." "Victoria, you mean," Ginny countered. "I can entertain the idea, but I'm going to at least give my kid a proper English name." Fleur huffed and folded her arms indignantly. "Besides," she added, "with my family's genes, it's going to be a boy." "Ginny, that's not how it works," Hermione said. "It's the father's genes that determine if it's a boy or a girl." "Oh, really?" she said, surprised. Hermione laughed. "Oi, we can't all be you, Hermione. And anyway, Harry, didn't your family have just one boy for what, like The last 3 generations? Harry blinked. Maybe? You'd have to ask Sirius. Statistics of small numbers, Hermione insisted. You know, you can just check what it is, George pointed out. But where's the fun in that? Ginny grinned. As long as you pick a neutral color for the wallpaper, Fleur sniffed. Ginny rolled her eyes. Fred was looking even more smug and fox-faced than usual as he stuck a worryingly large dragon-headed firework on the ground. Hey, Weasleys, he called. And the rest of you lot. Come see George's and my newest creation. We've been working all week on this one. Everyone got a good look at the firework. Many people were nervous. Harry piped up, "Oh boy, everybody get back. You don't want to stand close to a Weasley original." "Hey, we're not that bad," Fred protested. "We'll see," Ginny protested. No respect, brother," said George. "Very rude," Fred agreed. "Boorish. Insulting. I think we'll just have to show them." "Indeed," the twins said together. As everyone chuckled at their antics, they lit the firework, and then bolted. Everyone looked at each other in horror and bolted after them. But it wasn't as bad as all that. They laughed as they played it up, though you still didn't want to be too close in case of a misfire. But it went off without a hitch. With a loud whoosh, the firework soared high into the air and burst into a large flaming dragon. It unfurled wings as large as a Ukrainian iron belly as it swung around and swooped down low over the crowd, making them all duck, before it sailed back up and exploded into a dozen starbursts that filled the sky. "Okay," Ginny said. "I'll have to admit that was pretty cool." Hermione thought it was pretty cool too, but she wasn't quite through with them. She walked up behind the twins and grabbed each one by the ear. They yelped in pain and bent down close to her. "I might have known," she said sagely. "I might have known that's what you two would take away from that film, that is." "Hey, we couldn't let that Gandalf bloke one-up us," said George. "He's already showing off with that big staff of his," Fred agreed. "I mean, aside from being dead." Hermione suppressed a smile. She hoped she could keep that plot twist a secret until the next film came out. Ginny spoke up, calling to the party. "Say, you could do that thing with the staff, couldn't you, Hermione?" "What, the thing with the bridge?" Hermione clarified. "Sure, all he did was break a small stone bridge. I think anybody here could do it." "Sure, but can you do it with that badass staff?" Ginny asked. She rolled her eyes. "I don't have a staff, Ginny." "Could you make one?" "Probably." She shrugged. "It's an interesting question, or rather the more general question is, not all wizards in the world use wands, and there's a lot more room for variation within the bounds of wandcraft. I wonder what the limits are." "And she's off," George said, causing the rest of the party to laugh and Hermione to smack him in the arm. Hey, you got to admit, Hermione, it'd look pretty cool if a Death Eater came up and you could stop him just by lifting up a staff and shouting, "You... George!" She cut him off when his shout made everyone jump. "You totally should," Fred agreed. "It wouldn't have to be real. You already did that scary, in place of a Dark Lord speech, didn't you?" She had. Hermione blushed. She'd almost forgotten that. 5 years ago, shortly after Dumbledore's death, and she'd scared the pants off some of the junior Death Eaters. And Bill and Harry. "She did," Harry said. "How could I forget? You should do it, Hermione. You've been doing Lord of the Rings stuff for years now." "Yeah, let's see it," said Georgina. Hermione could tell they weren't going to let her get away without trying it. She'd have to improvise something. She found a branch on one of the trees that was about the right size and severed it with her wand. Then she picked it up and took a place nearer to the fire where she thought the lighting would be about right. The wand work would be tricky, but she could manage it. Placing her wand against the staff pointing down, she raised it high and shouted, "You shall not pass!" She brought the butt of the staff down hard on the ground. There was a flash and a puff of dust and sparks that preceded a loud crack, and a spiderweb of cracks radiated it. and a spider web of cracks radiated out on the ground. She jumped back as one of the cracks opened towards the fire, which suddenly collapsed into a small sinkhole. "Eep!" she squeaked. She dropped the staff. "Oops, sorry, lost my concentration for a moment. I wasn't sure what spell I should do in." "No harm done, Hermione," Arthur said. He waved his wand and the fire shifted back into place and relit itself. Yep, definitely more practical than Gandalf's magic. 29th of March, 2002. The Dementor hunting resumed not long into the new year. It was still dangerous, and no one was really happy about it, but they'd learnt from their mistakes. Unfortunately, Barty Crouch was stepping up his game too. Twice more he had sent people to attempt to disrupt a Dementor-killing ritual with the intent of killing them off, but they had arranged enough defenses to stop him. Twice again he had attempted to kidnap Marcus, once from a visit to Hermione and George's flat, hoping their defenses would be weaker in a Muggle area. They were, but not by enough to fail, and once walking down the street in Hogsmeade with Septima. That had prompted a major lockdown since he'd come so close to Hogwarts. The evening of the 23rd of April looked like a routine night raid on a nest of Dementors in Ireland. Depressingly, nothing out of the ordinary for the past 6 months, except that Hermione was ready to try out her new toy. "I think this is just about the final version," she said, holding up her death ray. The bottle to sunlight was a useful tool, but its range was rather limited, especially as you often couldn't afford a miss, and even with the handles it was hard to fire accurately from the hip. So, Hermione had built a more complex rig around the canister, like a rifle, but where the canisters could be quickly popped in and out, with spares stored on the belt or on the back. It was rather like an oversized water gun, but all in brass and steel. Much more steampunk, she thought was the term. "Looks fancy," George complimented. "This one have a name too?" "Yes," she said. "I called it Invictus." The gun worked great. Even though it didn't look that different to Wizard eyes, the better control made her work far smoother. They tracked down the Dementor nest and started killing them, as usual. However, tonight there was a problem. Barty Crouch hadn't been able to stop them again, but he had another way of disrupting a ritual. As Georgina stood before the Dementor to banish it, a glowing, not quite corporeal Patronus entered the circle, and Gaius Vector's voice came through. "Hermione, Georgina, he's got Marcus! Septima's hurt. We need help." The circle nearly destabilized on the spot, just from the Patronus. Georgina's exposure to the Dementor was supposed to be unblocked, especially by a Patronus. "Dad!" she shouted. She started to twitch. "Don't move!" Hermione shouted. She held Invictus trained on the Dementor's back, slowly burning through its body. They had already sacrificed the life energy from the Earth. An interruption now would release the energy and incinerate everything within 100 yards. And probably cause dangerous mutant magical plants and animals to grow on the spot afterwards. "Georgina, finish it!" Georgina remembered herself and forced herself back into the Dementor-killing mindset, despite the added weight of concern for her family. She completed the ritual, and they quickly packed up and returned to the Vector's house. "Do we have any idea where he is?" Hermione demanded when they arrived. Georgina hissed. "We'll never find him. If he's as smart as you say he is, he's probably under Fidelis right now." "Damn, you're right." "Hermione!" Gaius called. She ran into the parlor. Gaius was waving his wand over Septima, who was laid out on the floor out of necessity. "Oh God!" she breathed, and skidded on the carpet to kneel by her side and started casting what diagnostic charms she knew. "Damn it, I need to study up on this stuff more." Septima was clearly in a bad way. Her bones were painfully twisted, and from the way she was lying, it looked like her spine was bent. Chalky nodules were forming on her skin. She looked dazed, and she was crying, her tears leaving what looked like lime scale on her face, and she had a metal cap molded to her skull. "I'm sorry, Hermione," she said. "I tried to stop him. I couldn't—" "Shh, it's okay, Septima," Hermione said. "Crouch is too strong to fight without backup. We'll get Marcus back, somehow. Gaius, have you done anything for her?" "I've stabilized her for now," Gaius said.
But her pulse is irregular, and I'm having trouble keeping her chest from caving in. I haven't been able to do more because I don't know what he hit her with." "I don't recognize it either. It might be an original, some kind of decalcination curse. I might be able to reconstruct it, but it'll take time." "Pompeia's flued St. Mungo's. We can take her through as soon as we can move her."
No. She won't be able to survive the fluid network in this condition. Actually, I don't know if she can survive any of the normal methods of magical transportation. They're far too rough. How do you normally move someone with a crushed rib cage?"
"Well, if it's that bad, they can push a stretcher through the flue and slide them across."
"Oh, of course," Hermione said. "Okay, keep on her chest. I'll levitate her," Hermione said. "Georgina, tell your mother to call for a stretcher."
They got a stretcher from St. Mungo's to stick through the flue and slid Septima across it without the usual whirling. Gaius went through to help her, and Hermione called after him.
"Gaius, tell them not to use Skelgro until they're certain it will work. I have a bad feeling about that curse."
That left Hermione and Georgina standing with George and Pompeia in the ruins of the Vector household. Ron, a couple other R's, and Percy had arrived and were investigating. Harry came a few minutes later with a very pregnant Ginny, clearly over Harry's objections, though she immediately took a seat.
"Okay, everyone," Hermione addressed the group. "Barty Crouch kidnapped Marcus Vector. His son, unfortunately, if you didn't know. And, if he has any shred of sanity left, he'll be hiding under Fidelius somewhere."
"I don't know what we can do, then," Harry said. "He can hide out forever under Fidelius. We did, when we had someone who could cast it."
"But Crouch doesn't know how to live off the land like we did, Harry. He'll have to go out for clothes, supplies. He should have a bit of exposure."
Right, Ron spoke up. "So the question is, how do we smoke him out? Bait a trap somehow?" George growled softly.
Might work, but I'm saying no. Crouch still wants revenge on us, you know."
"And us," Ginny spoke up. "Not exactly a good time." "Not exactly a good time." She patted her stomach.
Ron winced.
"No, bad idea then. In fact, you two might want to get somewhere safer until the baby comes."
Even Ginny didn't object, which showed how serious it was.
"Say, doesn't Marcus still have the trace on him?"
Georgina asked. Hermione stopped and thought. Had she really missed? No.
"Ron, go ahead and check, but I doubt it. And Harry, tell Remus to check the Hogwarts registry too, but he's probably too young to be in there. No, if I can figure out how to disable the trace in a few months, I'm sure Barty Crouch can do it in 4 years. I think we're on our own here."
"Okay, then," Ron said. "We'll have to do it like the Death Eaters tried to. Track Crouch's followers and try to narrow down the area. Even with the Fidelius, we can still set up a perimeter, right?"
"I suppose," Percy said. "If we have the wand power, the Death Eaters were never able to bring enough force to bear to do it, even to find Harry."
"Well, yeah, but they had a lot of other stuff to worry about too, right?" He smiled. "And even Barty Crouch can't beat Hermione." 28th of April, 2002. Hermione really wished people would stop pinning their hopes on her like that. Her rituals may have won the war, but she never would have got through the war without Harry, George, Ron, and a lot of the rest of the Order, and this was even less in her wheelhouse. She offered a few tips, but Ron and the other R's were doing a decent job at tracking down Crouch on their own. Hermione's job was just to keep up the pressure on the Dementors so the R's didn't have to. But now, the noose was tightening. The R's had tracked Crouch's followers, to some surprise, to a small town near Northampton. That would solve their problem of getting supplies, and it would be a ready source of hostages if the time came, but it was a little less secure than a rural area. That wouldn't be much concern with the Fidelius charm, but Hermione, George, Harry, and Ginny had left immediately when the Death Eaters traced them to Nottingham. Crouch seemed to be playing a different game. Right now, the R's were ostensibly doing a street-by-street search of their own, even though they wouldn't get through the Fidelius charm. The real trick was that Brixworth was small enough to lay detection wards over the whole area. They wouldn't last long, but it would be long enough to narrow down the location further, or so they wanted Crouch to think. They probably could manage that plan if they had a few weeks, but the resources it would take and the risk to the statute of secrecy would be unacceptable. Rather, it was a double bluff. The search was a cover to lay the wards, one they expected Crouch to see through, and the wards were a ruse to smoke him out and get him to move instead of sitting comfortably behind his own. The backup was lying in wait. The signal came swiftly, but not in the form they expected.
Bang! Bang, bang, bang! Bang, bang!
Hermione whirled around and stared in the direction of the sounds.
Gunshots,
she breathed.
Death Eaters,
Georgina squeaked.
They're using guns now?
Or they armed the Muggles, Ron said darkly. Imperious to them to boost their numbers. But where would they get that many guns? Harry asked. Did they raid an armory? Hermione pulled out Ravenclaw's diadem, put it on, and closed her eyes. This operation just got a lot harder.
They made them, she said. It's a lot simpler than my chemistry stuff. They could do it. Anyone. How many Muggles could 20 Death Eaters imperious at once and keep control of them?
Everyone looked at each other, and Ron grimaced. If it was Voldemort, I'd say Merlin help us. But without him, maybe 100? Harry asked the obvious question. Do we have much choice? No, they didn't. A few minutes later, Hermione looked around at the assembled force, most of them from Dumbledore's army. Herself, George, Fred, Harry, Georgina, Angelina, Susan Bones, Hestia Jones, Penelope Clearwater, Padma Patil, Lavender, Neville, Luna, Percy, Sirius, and Aberforth Dumbledore, and that wasn't even counting the Aurors, including Ron. Nearly 36 fighters against Crouch's estimated force of no more than half that wizards, except now they could be outnumbered 3-1 by bewitched Muggles. A Muggle gun isn't any more dangerous than a piercing hex, Harry addressed the group. It's just that they're so fast that you can't dodge or put up a shield. Go in pairs. One of you keep the shield charm up at all times. The good thing is, Muggles can be disarmed, stunned, or have their guns damaged, and they won't have any other tricks. And even Imperious, most of them won't be good at fighting wizards. But don't get cocky, some will be soldiers. They moved out, spreading around the perimeter marked out by the Aurors, and keeping a sharp eye out for any armed Muggles. It was a guess, really, but it would be the best way for Crouch to come up with a force multiplier. Hermione went with George, although she was good enough with 2 wands to handle guns on her own. The rest of the team paired up and advanced towards the fray.
You know, it's a good thing Dora's almost due, or we might have had to stun her again, Sirius commented to Harry. Don't tell her I said that. You mean it's a good thing it was a full moon last night, or we would have had to stun Remus, Harry corrected him. Dora wouldn't let us get the drop on her again. True, although what about you? Sirius asked. Isn't your baby due about now? Ginny can't be happy about this.
Harry looked grimly at the town where the last of the Death Eaters were hiding, and he winced as if he'd heard a loud noise. She's not, he said, focusing on Ginny's mental voice. Okay, Gin. She's ordering me to stay back at the command center if I want to have any additional kids. Sirius laughed louder than he should have. Lily would have approved, Harry. Get back there and don't get yourself killed. Harry barely had time to get away before a hail of bullets rang out and impacted on the shields of the advancing wizards. Hermione staggered under the impacts. It looked like they had found the right place, but as Harry predicted, Muggles didn't have enough tricks to hold their own against wizards, even outnumbering them 3-1. They went down to stunning and disarming spells quickly. So, of course, that's when the Death Eaters jumped in. Hermione would later learn that there were 16 of them, although she only saw 4 where she was. She saw Crouch a little bit out of her range. They were throwing killing curses, forcing her and George and the others to dodge, losing half their cover. There was confusion as she threw spells at top speed, using Ravenclaw's diadem to focus only on the opponents at hand, and on protecting her husband. Luckily, Crouch's followers were much more fresh-faced than the old Inner Circle Death Eaters, people who had hailed from old dark families and trained for decades. These new Death Eaters just didn't have the same level of experience. Dumbledore's army focused on the Death Eaters as much as they could, holding the Imperious Muggles at bay with pure defense. Some of the attackers were injured, but one by one the Death Eaters fell. Some tried to apparate away, but they couldn't get through the anti-apparition wards that had been carefully layered on the town from outside it, so they wouldn't notice until it was too late. Unfortunately, as soon as they figured that out, someone shouted an order, and the Muggles turned their guns on each other. "No! Stop them!" Stunning hexes flew through the air more thickly than she'd ever seen. Hermione herself dropped her shield charm so that she could double cast as many spells as she could, deftly dodging the remaining curses flying back her way. It wasn't until nearly all the Muggles had been dropped that it registered to her that they were hesitating. The Imperious Curse was enough to get them to kill strangers, but with so many bewitched, the magic was stretched a little thin to force them to kill their neighbors. That hesitation probably saved dozens of lives. When the dust cleared, nearly all of the Death Eaters were dead or restrained. A couple were running, but they could at least get their faces from a pensieve, or so she hoped, though it wasn't without cost. "Hermione!" She snapped out of it and looked around to see half the town burning. Wizards and Muggles alike were running around frantically. She immediately turned to check on George, but while he looked the worse for wear, he was okay. "Hermione!" It was Fred and Percy, carrying Ron between them. As they approached, she saw he was unconscious and bleeding badly. "Ron!" George yelled, and they rushed to him. Hermione waved her wand over him and was oddly relieved to see that it was mostly just bleeding, which was the one thing she could heal well, even with dark magic involved. "I'll do what I can for him," she said. "Someone get Crouch before he gets away." "Vulnera Senenta! Vulnera Senenta!" Ron was stabilized with help from the other R's to be sent to St. Mungo's, and the rest of Dumbledore's army came stumbling back. Harry was near frantic when he saw Ron, but he'd be okay. However, 4 of the attacking force had lost their lives, including 2 R's. Lavender was struggling, sobbing as she carried a body half over her shoulder to the group. The lightning scar that covered half her face stood out sharply in the firelight, and Hermione choked when she saw her lay the body down. Padma. "She saved me," Lavender cried. "We both came to get justice for Parvati, but she—" She trailed off, unable to speak. Sirius came back carrying another body, and she was even more shocked by this one. Aberforth Dumbledore. "Aberforth!" Hermione said. "I can't believe it. Why was he even here?" "Said something about wanting to finish the job," Sirius said. "He wasn't happy Crouch got away before." "Well, we got Crouch this time," she said. She motioned, and Crouch was dragged to the group, bound, dazed, mute, and under guard. "Finally," Harry said. He looked around. "Hey, where's Neville?" "Harry! Hermione!" It was Neville's voice. They all turned to see Neville dragging another prisoner to them. "I got him! I got Crouch!" he called. "What?" He dragged the man to them. He was much younger than Crouch, and with a darker skin tone, maybe Spanish or Italian. He only looked Hermione's age, though she didn't recognize him. "He almost escaped," Neville said. He was covered in blood, but it didn't seem to be slowing him down. "We spotted him trying to get through the anti-apparition wards, but we stopped him." "Neville, what are you talking about?" Harry said. "That's not Crouch, this is." "He's using polyjuice, Harry," Neville said. "He wanted us to go after that one. This is him." Hermione paled. That was exactly the kind of thing Crouch would do, and Neville was a step ahead of her. If even he was caught up with him... She exchanged a look with Harry, and he nodded. "Check the perimeter," he shouted. "Bring anyone you find back here, even if they're a friendly or a Muggle." Most of Dumbledore's army scattered again, checking for anyone else who had got away. Neville stayed behind. "Harry, this is him," he insisted. "If he's using polyjuice, he could be anyone," Harry said. "How can you be so sure?" "Harry, I've read his file. I know how he moves.
This is Crouch, trust me.
Stupefy!
Stupefy! What the... Luna had cast first, and Neville was dueling her.
Harry, that's not Neville!
Luna screamed. Hermione joined the fight, and several of the DA turned around to help.
Antidote to polyjuice!
Hermione yelled.
Anyone?
Neville suddenly dropped the man he was carrying and lunged for Crouch. At the same time, he shot a killing curse at Luna, who ducked. Definitely not Neville, then. Even under Imperius, he wouldn't do that. Hermione tried to stun him, but she had to duck another killing curse aimed at her. The false Neville somehow dodged and weaved his way to the man who looked like Crouch, but to her shock, he didn't rescue him. He pointed his wand at him, the tip glowing green.
No one move or I'll kill him!
He shouted, his tongue flicking between his teeth. Stop, all of you! Hermione and Harry ordered at the same time. She didn't know what his game was, but it didn't look good.
Oh, you're so clever, little loony love,
fake Neville mocked her.
No, I'm not your Neville, and I'll save you the trouble, Mudblood. I have the antidote here.
He produced a vial of potion, drank a sip, poured a sip into the mute Crouch's mouth, and tossed it to Luna. She sniffed it and waved her wand over it, but only when the first two began changing did she trust it and pour some into the mouth of the unconscious man who'd been dragged to them. Everyone watched in horror as Neville, as Hermione had expected, turned into Crouch. The unconscious man turned into Neville, and Crouch shrank down and turned into Marcus.
Marcus!
Georgina cried. She started to run toward him, but Crouch, the real Crouch, produced a second wand and pointed it at her. Crouch looked around, twitching.
Nobody move. Nobody call for help. And don't go for those fancy rings and necklaces. I know about those too. You're going to let me leave with my son in peace, or I kill the boy. You're mad.
You wouldn't.
He's your son.
He would, Harry said hollowly, shutting up the objections. He turned to face them. You've never seen how twisted family can get. He'd do it.
Listen to your savior, Crouch agreed. He knows about family gone wrong. No, you're all going to stay right there while we walk out of here.
He moved slowly to pick up Marcus. But Harry spoke again. Oh, you're good all right, Crouch, but you forgot one thing. Crouch froze and looked him in the eye. What's that, Potter? Who I've got in my head. Crouch's eyes widened a fraction, and he turned.
Avada Kedavra!
Thud. Crouch's killing curse sailed out behind him, right through where Ginny would have been if she were actually there. Harry and Ginny weren't stupid. Crouch wasn't stupid either, of course. He only half turned and kept one eye on Harry. But to do that move, he had to move the wand that was trained on Marcus behind him, and he couldn't point his other wand at Marcus for fear of accidentally double casting, which was exactly what he did. But Georgina anticipated that and drove down and to the side under the curse. As she did, she summoned Marcus to herself, and at that moment, Harry's silent stunning hex hit Crouch directly in the face. He went down hard. Georgina staggered back to her feet on shaky legs, clutching a crying Marcus to her chest.
He could have killed me, Harry, she said.
I knew you'd dodge it, he said. Any apprentice of Hermione's isn't going to get caught out by a single spell like that.
Brilliant. You see, this is why you're the hero, Harry, she said. And now, it's finally over.
Barty Crouch awoke chained to a chair somewhere under the Ministry of Magic.
So, Mr. Crouch, you want to try that again?
Hermione asked smugly. His response was rather less than polite.
Told you he'd say that,
Neville said, the real Neville this time.
And you too, Longbottom,
Crouch hissed and spat at him. Neville clenched his fist and took a half-step toward him, but restrained himself from hitting him.
Oh, I really wish I could do this myself, he said, but I'll have to content myself with legal justice. Bottomus Crouch, Jr., it is my great pleasure to inform you that you have been tried in absentia and convicted of abuse of authority, torture of vulnerable persons, crimes against humanity, and, hell, I don't know, a bunch of stuff. In payment for these crimes,
You shall be hanged by the neck until dead, to be carried out—" But he stopped there, because Crouch started laughing like a madman. "What the hell?" he said. Crouch kept laughing. This time Neville did hit him, a backhanded slap hard across the face. "Listen to me, you bastard!" he yelled. "You're done! We caught all your lackeys. We're pumping them for information to make sure we got them all. We got your son back, and you're going to be executed. You've failed!" "Ha ha ha!" Crouch cackled. "You think you've won! Foolish boy, you think you beat me!" "Shut up!" Neville yelled. "Go crying home to Mummy!" Neville lunged to punch him in the jaw. "Neville! Neville!" Hermione and Ron rushed to grab him before he could land a blow. "Mate, it's not worth it," Ron said. "He deserves it!" Neville tried to break free. "Yes, I deserve it! Ha!" Crouch yelled, grinning madly. "Neville, wait," Hermione said. "Something's wrong. I have a bad feeling about this." Everyone turned and stared at her. "What?" Ron said. He's not another imposter, is he?" "No, I don't think so." She raised her wand to Crouch with trembling fingers and whispered, "Atma Prakata!" Barty Crouch's soul was dark, laced with green, not necessarily evil in itself, though perhaps someone to keep an eye on. But what horrified her and everyone in the interrogation room was the sight of the long tear running through it with ragged, blackened edges. She flinched back. Horror dawned on Ron's face, and Neville looked uneasy. "You made a Horcrux," Hermione said. Crouch laughed even more madly than before. "A Horcrux? A Horcrux?" Ron gasped. "You mean one of those?" Neville asked, and they nodded. "Then that means we can't—" "We can't kill him," Hermione confirmed, "or his spirit will get away like Voldemort's did." She felt sick. The Horcrux wasn't even the worst part of it. The worst part was that she knew damn well that Crouch was smarter than Voldemort about strategy. "Where did you put it?" she demanded. He only started laughing again. Part of her wondered if he'd lost his grip on sanity completely, but she grabbed him by his robes and shoved him against the wall. "Where?" "Hermione!" Ron called. Crouch cackled. "Dropped it into the water somewhere over the Mediterranean. Didn't much pay attention to where." Hermione let go of his robes and stepped back, ashen-faced. She could hardly believe it. He'd beat them, after all that. They'd got the Dementor problem mostly under control, even with Germany stonewalling. They'd stopped Crouch's new Death Eaters, got Marcus back, and captured Crouch himself. And now, at the end, he'd still outsmarted them. She drew her wand, her face twisted with hate. "Hermione, don't!" "Dornroshan!" Crouch slumped in his chair in a deep coma. Ron stared at her. "There," she said. "Keep him alive. Keep him sedated. But if he wakes up, he can probably figure out a way to kill himself, even if he's restrained. Turn his magic on himself or something. And have a Cursebreaker check him for dead man spells that'll kill him. We can't take any chance of his soul escaping, or it'll be our first year all over again." Ron shuddered. "Bloody hell, you're right. I'll take care of it." "Good." She turned and left the room. She passed George, Harry, and Georgina waiting for her outside. She spared them only a glance and said, "I'm going out." George started to follow. "Where? I need some time alone," Hermione said. "I'm not so sure you should." "I'll be fine, George. I just need to vent a bit." She quickened her pace as he followed her. As fast as she could, she took the lift to the atrium and apparated away. Georgina wandered carefully toward an artificial clearing in the forest near the burrow, with George following close behind. Even between the two of them, it had taken some time to find her, but George had a few ideas of where Hermione would go. A forest somewhere, away from people, where she could do a lot of damage without hurting anyone, and Georgina knew roughly what signs to look for. "Are you sure she's okay?" Georgina asked.
I've never seen her like that. Not up close, anyway.
I have, George said. And it's bloody scary, but she won't hurt herself. She won't do any permanent damage to herself, but she loses control sometimes. She needs someone to rein her in. They reached the clearing. Georgina took one look and clapped her hands over her mouth.
George, she said, I think you can skip the reining her in part.
Hermione was on her hands and knees in the middle of the clearing, her shoulders shaking as she panted for breath. The trees around her were not destroyed, but in ruins nonetheless, each one in a different way. The first shredded into splinters. The next, it was hard to pinpoint the difference, but it looked like it had shattered like ice. One was tied into knots, another fallen over limp like rubber, one completely denuded of bark. They seemed to get more creative as they went along. There was a tree on fire that was burning out more slowly than it should. One was glowing unnatural colors. A small tree seemed to have turned to stone right down to the smallest twigs, or, more likely, those carbon nanotubes she'd talked about. Georgina recognized the signature of the pool of water around the trees. Two trees were fused together in a way that gave her a headache. There was a tree whose branches had split open like sausages, the heartwood laying separated like layers of an onion. Another had received similar treatment, except that the wood fibers had been separated from each other, turning it into a massive ball of fluff. Hermione had taught Georgina enough to understand the shape of most of what she'd done, but a couple of them baffled her. The fluff ball seemed like it should have taken more power than a single witch could muster. She shuddered. She'd almost forgotten how scary Hermione could be when she was angry. "Hermione! Hermione!" George said. He rushed to her side and helped her up, holding her tight. "Are you all right?"
"I'm sorry,"
Hermione said. Her voice was hoarse.
"I lost my temper."
He looked around at the clearing. "Yeah, no kidding." She struggled weakly in his arms, not really against him, but just in frustration. She flexed her fingers. Her hands and feet ached, though she couldn't remember hurting them in particular.
"I'm sorry," she repeated. "It just feels so worthless."
"Please calm down, love," George said and kissed her. "It's not worthless. We won."
"It is. There's still 100 or so escaped Dementors out there. We caught the man who did it. We caught Europe's most wanted wizard, and we can't do anything to him because he has a Horcrux. A Horcrux we can't get to, maybe ever, which I knew we should have been worried about 4 bloody years ago."
"Come on, it's not as bad as all that," he said. "It's just a setback. Other people can solve it. He'll keep for a few decades, and this time next week he won't have any followers left who can break him out. He's safe, and we saved your godson. You've more than done your duty." She shook her head.
"I still should have been working on the Horcrux problem. I don't want the life of one more comatose man hanging over us like that."
Georgina sighed and smacked her in the back of the head.
"Ow! Hermione, stop," she said. "That's 6 months of Dementor exposure talking. We've been telling you you're overdoing it. You need to relax. Go home and spend the night with your husband. You'll feel better."
Hermione blushed.
"Georgina!"
George grinned and kissed her hard in the mouth. "She's right, you know." She rolled her eyes.
"Fine. Take me home, George."